and I'm pretty sure I have cat hair on my lips. So today is February 1st. We are already a month into 2022. That is a bit crazy to me. So that means it's time for another monthly wrap up. January was actually pretty good. I think almost everything was 4 stars. It didn't quite end the best, but it could have been worse. So let's get right into it. So the first book I read in 2022 was Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. This just came out last year in 2021, which I think most of these are pretty new releases. They either came out last year or just a few years ago. This is a Greek myth retelling, and I gave it 4 stars. So after reading this, I kind of understood the summary a lot better, which I mean, you probably should. But I kind of understood why it wasn't as descriptive as it could have been, and that it only kind of tells what happens in the very beginning part of the book. It's because everything else would be spoilers. So this whole beginning part is pretty much based on the myth of the Minotaur. Ariadne is a princess of Crete, and I hope that's how you pronounce it. I'm not quite sure. And her brother is actually the Minotaur. Her mother was punished by Poseidon, which is kind of dumb because he did it as revenge toward her father, the king. So it's just kind of like, really? Why'd you have to punish the woman? But the Prince of Athens shows up, Theseus, and he's essentially there to kill the Minotaur. Ariadne kind of sees this as a way out, and so she does what she can to help him, and she flees in the night before anyone finds out what has happened, and this event just sort of changes the entire course of her life. So because the summary is so brief, this definitely ended up being quite different from what I expected. I've always really enjoyed Greek myths, but I was unfamiliar with Ariadne's, and if you've read Madeline Miller's book Circe, she is a very minor character that you meet when she is a child, and obviously since these are retellings, like, the events in those books aren't going to match up with each other. But since I really didn't know anything about her, I had no idea how this book was going to play out. And I really thought the Minotaur was going to be a bigger part of the story. Like, we don't even see the event of him being killed or anything. It's just Theseus going into the labyrinth and him coming out of the labyrinth, and that's pretty much it for that part of the story. But this whole Minotaur thing is essentially just the setup for the entire rest of the book. So in the end, we do follow Ariadne and her sister Phaedra their entire lives. And we actually switch point of views between Phaedra and Ariadne a bit. The dynamic between the sisters is interesting, and obviously, since it's based on Greek myth, it is also tragic. As I kind of alluded to before, one of the main themes of this book is how frequently women are punished for the deeds of men. And several other myths are brought up, including Medusa. It is really sad to read about, but I think it's something that's really important to analyze. And I'm really glad that this author really made that kind of the forefront of this book. Like, Ariadne even creates like a tapestry at some point of like, that's picturing like all these women that had to deal with these hardships, and it didn't even have anything to do with their own actions. It was for something that someone else did. The sequence of events in this also reminded me of Circe by Madeline Miller. However, I enjoyed this one a lot more. Circe just kind of was a bit dull for me, and here I felt like there was a lot less like lulls in the plot. There was pretty much always something happening. They are written in quite a similar manner though, so if you did enjoy Circe, I'm having a hard time talking today. But if you did enjoy Circe, then I definitely think you would enjoy Ariadne as well. Next is another pretty new release, and that is The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. This is a horror thriller mystery, and I gave this 3 stars. So once a month for the past 16 years, these group of what's known as final girls, which they're essentially like the final person alive after a massacre, they meet up for a pseudo-therapy session, and one by one, they end up getting, like, picked off by this unknown killer. So the main one we follow, her name is Lynette, and she is by far the most paranoid one of the group. And we essentially just kind of follow her as she chases after her theories on what's happening to try to save the girls that are left. So I think this had the potential to be a 4-star read because I actually enjoyed the plot, like the concept and everything I thought was fun, but the characters are insufferable. Like, they are all just horrible. And another thing that just was so annoying is that this main group of girls, they're all in age from like they're all in age from late 30s to early 50s because all the stuff that happened to them was in like the 70s and 80s. So they're older than your like average protagonist in this kind of story, but they act like high schoolers, if not middle schoolers. Like, they're always just at each other's throats over the most petty freaking thing. Like, in the first chapter, they're arguing over freaking snacks. Like, it's so dumb. And, like, I don't know if Grady Hendrix had them act like this to kind of show, like, well, their trauma happened when they were teenagers, and so they're kind of, like, stuck in that mentality. I really hope that was his reasoning, because otherwise, why the hell are they acting like this? But it was really hard for me to believe that they were older women. On a more positive note, this is a very readable book. I found myself like flying through the pages really quickly. It flows well, has great pacing, and the chapters are like the perfect length. This was also surprisingly mixed media, so at the beginning of each chapter, there is like an article or a transcript, and I think the first chapter, it's even like a Reddit post. So that's kind of how we learn more about the backstories of the characters. So even though this seemed like a very promising book, it was just way too difficult to look past the characters to really get like that full enjoyment out of it, and that's why it ended up being a little disappointing, but I still think it's a 3-star book. Next is a book that's actually been getting quite a bit of hype lately, and that is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This came out in 2020, is like a magical realism fantasy, and I gave this 4 stars. So this book takes place in a mansion with endless corridors and rooms that houses a guy named Piranesi, and one other man that he refers to as the other. It becomes clear to them that someone else has entered their space, and Piranesi must decide what the truth behind this infinite space actually is. So I picked up this book because I kept seeing it recommended to people who are fans of House of Leaves by Mark C. Danielewski, and so I was really excited about that, especially since it also takes place in like a house that is just like so huge on the inside. So I was really excited to kind of see the comparisons and how they're similar. However, as you can see in my reading vlog, my expectations were very different from how the book actually ended up being. And I think that was really a detriment to my enjoyment of this in the end, as like, personally, for me, for my entertainment value out of it, I think it's more like 3 stars, but objectively, I can see how this is a good book, and so that's why I rated it 4. Also, from the description, I thought Piranesi was going to be like alone for most of the story, but that doesn't exactly end up being the case. So there being such a larger cast of characters than I was expecting, I think also kind of put me off. And the type of story this kind of morphed into just wasn't what I was looking for when I picked it up. So I really just think this was a case of like bad timing. I really don't have many thoughts on this book really in the end. I did enjoy the beginning more than the later half. I really like Piranesi as a character. Like, I think he is cool and interesting, and I would love to learn more about him. And like, I could just listen to him talk about this freaking house like forever, but it just didn't end up being what I was looking for at that time. The next book I read is actually an e-arc from NetGalley, and that is Little Bird by Tiffany Moret or Moret. I'm not exactly sure to pronounce her last name there. This actually comes out June 7th of this year. This is a horror fantasy, and I also gave this 4 stars. So our main character, Josie, is an alcoholic who uses like this really strict work schedule to try to cope with all the losses in her life. Her whole routine is uprooted when this shrub in her backyard starts growing huge vines that seem to have a mind of their own, And right on top of all these vines sits a talking skeleton named Skelly. So the last 20% of this book is actually what bumped it up to 4 stars for me. Otherwise, I think it would have been 3 stars. Because the whole beginning, I was just like, I don't know about this. Just like the voice of the character and how it's written and everything. It was just a little too, I don't know, on the nose, I guess, for me. So I wasn't, it did take me a while to get into this one. Also, as the story goes on, the writing does get more serious, so that's probably why I ended up liking it more at the end. The ending does suit the characters and the writing style quite well, and it has a proper conclusion. And I feel like I read a lot of books where stuff's like really ambiguous, where this like pretty much tells you like exactly what happens. So I feel like that was a little refreshing. So instead of like the traditional chapters, this book is divided up into days, and the entire story takes place in like just over a week. We are introduced to Josie, who is just like this very sarcastic, crass, has a grudge against the world kind of person. And it's definitely difficult to sympathize with her in the beginning, because obviously we don't know her backstory right away, and it's just kind of like, wow, you're pretty horrible. But she's just so abrasive, and then there are points where she's also just so dense that it can be frustrating. So it's just like, I don't know about this main character. But as we learn more about her background and things that have happened, it's a lot more clear why she behaves that way, and she kind of turns into this more sad character than anything. So the first genre this book is listed as is horror, and I actually disagree with that, as the horror elements are quite light in this. I would actually call this a dark comedy, especially with the style this is written as. Just the way the characters interact with each other, and the writing style, everything has like this humorous edge to it, which that did take a little getting used to in the beginning, but I think part of that is because I do tend to read more serious books. So in the end, this one actually really turned out to be a surprise for me, and it was just fun in the end. So definitely recommend this if you're more into like humorous, dark comedy kind of stuff and ridiculousness. Next book I read is actually another e-arc, and that is The Lines That Define Me, Volume 1 by Hiromasa Togami and Atsunori Horiuchi. This just came out on January 18th. This is a manga, and I also gave this 4 stars. So I think 4 stars is what I gave out the most this month. So I'm actually going to read the summary directly from Goodreads, as it's short, sweet, and to the point, and I don't think I could do any better. So Sosuke Aoyama is a college student adrift on his own, until a chance meeting with Subio-kuga artist Kozan Shinoda brings him into the world of India ink painting. But though he finds connection with the art and Shinoda himself, there's more to both the art world and Shinoda's family than Sosuke realizes. So this actually ended up being a very cute and even educational manga with like a hint of sadness at the end there. The story starts at an exhibition for ink painting, so right away we get to see like not only the manga character style, but we see this ink painting style, and it's really interesting to see those two styles combined in a manga. But like the contrast between the art of the characters, the background, and then seeing those ink paintings, it makes everything really quite beautiful to look at. But this whole like chance encounter talks about in the summary, it's like this old famous artist dude, he adopts like Sosuke as like his apprentice, and we learn right along with Sosuke like how to get the ink ready for painting, how to hold the brush, things of that nature. And so like you're kind of learning with him. So as we go on this journey with Sosuke, we find out that he's like a bit of a loner, has this sad air about him. And we know that something has happened in his past that he hasn't completely come to terms with. And this is brought up at the very end of the volume, which does give it like this perfect bittersweet ending, but it doesn't kind of come right out and say what happened and how it's affected him and everything. So we should obviously learn more about that in later volumes. But overall, this was a pretty relaxing volume to read, and I definitely highly recommend it to anyone that is interested in art, just because like how they do the ink paintings is just really interesting. And finally, we have Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. Yeah. So this came out in 2019, is a sci-fi fantasy, and I gave this 2 stars. So this is obviously a lot of glare, so I'm just gonna put that down and pop a thing up right here. So this book is about these 9 houses. Basically, each planet houses a clan, 9 total, and Gideon and Harrowhawk, our 2 MCs, are from the Ninth, and they have to join like the heirs of all the other houses in this trial that they might not make it out alive from. The main problem, however, is that Gideon and Harrow have spent most of their lives trying to kill each other. So I'm actually going to read this little blurb on the very front, like underneath the title here, because this is what caught my attention. This is why I picked up this book. It says, lesbian necromancers explore a haunted Gothic palace in space. Decadent nobles vie to serve the deathless emperor. Skeletons. That sounds super interesting, right? I thought so too. And that's not exactly what I ended up getting. So our main character, Gideon, I assume she's supposed to be the lesbian, but she can actually be argued as bi based on some of her comments, and she's not a necromancer. And I'm not gonna assume the other character's sexuality when nothing is ever really said about it at all in here. So it's just kind of like, okay. And then the in space part. Sure, we start off in space at the beginning, but most of this book takes place on Earth. Why? Why would you write this sci-fi fantasy when being in space is one of the main draws and have it be on Earth? So, yeah, I don't think that should be the main blurb on the front. And then, for the first 200 pages of this over 400-paged book, nothing happens. I was actually so close to DNFing this. Like, oh man, I was really, like, conflicted with myself because I'm like, it's boring, nothing's happening. But then that blurb just kept coming back in my mind, and I'm like, I want to know, though. So I did end up finishing it, and I don't think it was worth it. I really don't. Like, that whole beginning part, it mainly just consists of Gideon, like, walking down hallways, checking to see if doors are locked or not. Like, can she go in this random room? And then eating food. Like, that's it. Like, you could pretty much just call it urban exploring. Oh, and also, she's banned from talking to, like, the other people that are there, so there really aren't even conversations that happen because she can't talk. And then when the plot finally does get rolling a bit, it really doesn't take off like I thought it would. Like, the whole meat of the story really doesn't happen until the last 40 pages. And it just feels like it takes so much to get there. And it's too much like dilly-dallying. But the way this does end just makes me feel like the entire book was pointless. Like, I don't know why this needed to happen. This needs to exist. Like, it just felt like a pointless story. And from what I know, this is at least a duology. There's a second book. I don't know if there's going to be more beyond that, but I am not picking up the second one. Definite no. One of the interesting aspects of this book is the relationship between Gideon and Harrow. Like I said, they spend like their entire lives wanting to kill each other, trying to kill each other, don't get along at all. Well, like that whole complicated relationship, following that and how they have to work together and stuff, that's cool. But just their attitudes towards each other shift so drastically in just one scene. It just doesn't feel believable at all to me. And I found it a bit off-putting. And especially since like the way the entire rest of the cast interacts with Gideon is perfect. Like, it's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's fascinating. It's interesting. It's great. And this is supposed to be the main relationship in the book, and so that was just another disappointment for me in the end. So the best thing by far in this book are the fight scenes, but they're so few and far in between. They really do shine, but it's just, I can't make up for what the rest of this book lacks. And in the end, I just feel like this story didn't deliver what it was offering. And that is everything I read in the month of January. I thought I was going to have another book in the end, but my weekend ended up being quite busy, so I was not able to finish that. But as always, thank you for hanging out with me. It is always appreciated, and until next time, bonne journée and au revoir.